Welcome back. Now, it has been a week since the U.S. elections that many analysts say might bring a new shift in the global and economic developments. Now, tonight we'll bring you an update on the global and the local markets performance a week after the U.S. elections. Now, joining us on the line on Zoom is Economist Indileni Nanghonga. A very good evening, Ms. Nanghonga, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Now, talk to us, give us an overview of how the global markets are now, especially a week after the U.S. elections that caused volatility. Has there been calm? Has calm actually returned to the markets yet?
I think it's important to know that we have actually seen a reactionary rise in the market, and that was due to Trump victory. But that was also sustained more by the U.S. interest rate cuts. We have seen the U.S. market showing signs of stabilization, with, of course, the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq gaining around about 1 to 2% due to central banks reducing interest rate. Furthermore, we've also seen other global markets, particularly Asia, showing some strong gains, as well as Hong Kong, the Hang Seng, showing a surge of nearly 5%. Now that, although yes, it is a U.S. election and we have seen some victory, I think the stabilization was more supported by rate cuts, seeing the equity surging and also the market relatively being positive, therefore resulting into the volatility subsiding gradually, then drastic, if it had just been the U.S. victory, a reactionary victory.
Now, if we look at the exchange rate between the US dollar and South African rand, to which Namibia is pegged, this was also affected by the volatility. How is the Namibian dollar through the South African rand performing now?
I think what we have actually seen is the US dollar surging. And apart from it just being the South African rand, we have also seen alongside it other emerging market currencies actually depreciating during the same period of time. The South African rand is still faring quite well. I think the volatility hasn't been significant. Although, of course, the rand weakened as, we have seen a couple of investors pulling out their from some of the emerging markets and redirecting it to the US for higher returns and also anticipated continuous strengthening in the dollar. So we have seen those movements, but at least it wasn't as drastic as initially anticipated.
Now, the behavior of the markets gave an indication that the U.S. candidate and president-elect now, Donald Trump, is favored by the market. What makes him the favorite pick to investors?
I think Trump is really often favored by investors due to several economic policies that he had in his previous term introduced and also continued to promise during his campaign. One of those being the tax cuts and deregulations, where in his previous term we have seen Trump actually reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. And that is really boosting corporate profits. And also we have seen in his current campaign is continuously promising to cut further tax rates to 15%, and that's for the corporate. And most of the time you will see that any candidate that is pro-business, you will see investors favoring those more. One of the other things is also that Trump has shown pro-business stance, and that's with his approach of actually emphasizing the reducing regulatory burdens on businesses. In addition to that, I think investors are optimistic for certain sectors that are bound to bounce or to show some resilience, and that's mainly looking at the manufacturing sector, the construction sector, and the service sectors that could benefit from Trump's business-oriented focus.
Now, the U.S. is one of Africa's biggest trading partners. How will Trump's victory affect the relationship between Africa and the U.S.?
Well, I think that's quite an interesting one. We have seen that in Trump's campaign, he re-emphasized America first. And that approach actually focuses on prioritizing the U.S. interests. What we are likely to see is that if the African countries have strategies that aligns to the U.S. Strategic goals, we are likely to retain that particular support. However, I think African countries shouldn't also be surprised if we see any other policy reviews that may come our way. Furthermore, we have also seen in the previous administration of Trump that he has supported security collaborations with African nations, especially in combating terrorism. And if similar policies continues, we are likely to see robust and strong alliances with African countries because of that mutual interest.
Now, BRICS countries are fast advancing on their de-dollarization agenda. How would you say is Trump likely to tackle this big challenge, especially to the U.S. economy and the dominance of the dollar?
I think that is actually posing a strategic challenge for Trump in the sense that Trump has continuously emphasized on the importance of the US dollars being a global dominance. And he's likely to adopt defensive mechanisms aimed at the countering moves that the BRICS is trying to bring on board. However, I also believe that he is likely to reinforce bilateral agreements and also form some alliances with the various BRIC countries to make sure that the dollar still remains a dominant currency.
Now, when Trump was in office, he was pushing for trade war with China, and it was negatively affecting the world economy. Would you say this instability is likely to return?
Well, there are concerns that this instability is likely to return. And of course, if he continues with the continuous trade policies, we could see that tension reviving. And of course, with possible tariffs or aggressive trade policies that will have a ripple effect on international supply chains and the overall economic growth globally.
Now, finally, how will the result of this U.S. election impact on the overall global economy?
I think without necessarily singling out just the US election, I think there are existing trade tensions coupled with climate change that is already putting a dent on global growth. And with, of course, the US election, any additional trade volatility is likely to have even a much more adverse bearing on global trajectory. So that is really what we are seeing, a bit more volatility, probably even in the short run, but having a ripple effect, especially if trade tensions continues, having a ripple effect on developing countries such as Namibia and not so far off the other emerging economies.
Well, Ms. Nanghonga, we thank you so much for your time. We thank you for your insights.
No, thanks for having me. Have a great evening.
Well, there you have it. That was Economist Indileni Nanghonga taking us through how the market is performing a week later after the U.S. elections. Well, Business Today returns shortly. Stay with us.